Hi everyone, my name is Adnan. It's great to see so many students here. It's very inspiring. So this is going to be a brief account of my, well, let's say journey or path, maybe more modestly. The Road to Big Tech and Key Takeaways is the title. So what we're going to do is just go through some major milestones of my career of the last 18, 20 years. And what I'll try to do is extract from each of the stages some key takeaways that I would wish I'd known before. So I wish you can take some of this on board and maybe do something with it. So as a quick introduction, I'm Adnan Akhundev. I've been a software engineer since 2002 was my first software engineering job. It's been, 24 years now? And currently, or most recently, I've been working in AI infrastructure with things like machine learning compilers and GPUs and kind of some other interesting things. Pretty nerdy, pretty technical, but still fascinating. Most recently, I've been in Meta, working in PyTorch core team. And before that, in Volkswagen's machine learning research lab in Germany. And even before that, which will be like the beginning of the journey I'll be talking about today, is Simbrella. Very interesting and inspiring fintech startup company from Azerbaijan. Well, it's no longer a startup, but it was when I was there. This is how some of you might know me, but after I put this image in the slides, I realized that you're very young here, so I don't know if you remember, this is probably 15 years ago. So maybe some of you remember, or maybe the faculty members who are present here remember. But one thing I can say that my taste in clothes was probably better back then. Okay, the major milestones I'm talking about is Simbrella and then Technical University of Munich and Volkswagen and then Meta, and they span 18 years and they span 3 different countries from Azerbaijan to Germany to the United States. And we'll start with Simbrella. Show of hands, who has heard about Simbrella? Okay, a few people, good. So Simbrella, whether you've heard about it or not, most people whom I talk and who have heard about Simbrella, they know that it's a remarkable startup company from Azerbaijan. They do something cool, but not really clear what they do. And it is probably a cool tech company to work in on Azerbaijani tech market. Well, at least it was. I am not sure how it is today, but it was like 10 years ago. And I can tell that this is just the visible part of the iceberg, because there is probably much more fascinating stuff under the visible part, which I'm going to talk about briefly right now. Simbrella was a mobile fintech company, to the best of my knowledge, before the word fintech even existed. And if I have to summarize Simbrella's business model or Simbrella's product or what the company did in one single sentence, that would be nano financing at scale. So going back to Simbrella, that was a mobile fintech company, mobile meaning that we worked with mobile operators like Azercell and Paxel and Narmobile in Azerbaijan and in many different countries like around the world too. And the product or the business model of the company was based on what is called prepaid mobile. Like back in the day in Azerbaijan and in many other emerging markets, the model of using mobile services, like talking on the mobile phone and sending texts and using internet and so on, was based on prepaid. What it means is that you should first pay and then use it. And when you run out of credit, then you can no longer use it. And the very simple idea at the core of Simbrella's business was, why don't we try to evaluate people, the clients, the customers of the mobile, of the telco, and decide which of those customers are eligible, are good enough for us to provide them with advance, or as the term that was used by Simbrella back then, with credit. So even before you go and top up your balance and continue talking with the prepaid balance already in place, you can get a quick advance from Simbrella by sending a text or making a quick call or whatever, and without going out and buying something, I don't know if you remember, but back then in 2008, it was scratch cards where there were some codes that you had to enter. Now it's probably not like that. Now it's credit cards. This was very convenient. This was very successful. First in Azercell, it started, and then came some fascinating history, which resulted in these numbers that you see here. So these numbers are not made up. They are from Simbrella's website. The link is there. The slides will be shared. You can click the links. You can check all the stuff yourself. 240 million users. Like, they are distinct people, distinct users in all the countries and all the mobile operators that Simbrella served its customers in. 240 million users is 3% of the world population. It is very cool, I think. I hope you agree. 25 countries is more than 12% of the world's countries. And 3 million credits a day, that's also a lot. Basically, these are the peak numbers, or this is the coverage, the trace, that Simbrella, a relatively small and very lean and agile company from Azerbaijan, has left in its line of business. And the company did it with a very, let's say, efficient approach to resources, especially human resource, because circa 2015, that was my last year in Simbrella, and I would say that was around its kind of golden age, maybe slightly later. We were just 50 people in Baku office, and 20 of them were tech team. That was my team. I was a CTO back then. Of course, there were some partners around the globe too, but the core operations and core R&D, so as it's written there, in-house tech R&D, the operations, the patents, and so on, this was all done by this small, very agile, and pretty effective team from a relatively small office in Baku. Well, this is something that I consider remarkable. So this is Simbrella, and what I'm going to do now as the first stage of 3 that I'm going to cover in this talk is discussing some takeaways, what I can personally learn and what I would like to share about this interesting company. And I would really love to get some questions if you have them. The takeaways from, well, what I learned from being part of Simbrella, right, part of the small and very ambitious organism, is that one shouldn't hesitate to be bold and dream big. If we look at the history of Simbrella, it was immensely successful in Azerbaijan. Simbrella was a spin-off of Digital Services Company, or DSC as it was called after that. DSC did some value-added services in Azerbaijan, exclusively in Azerbaijan. Learn your horoscope for today, I don't know, buy some ringtone which is very unique and reflecting your character and stuff like that. It was a relatively successful line of business. But then when SimCredit came, SimCredit was this product, like flagship product of Simbrella. This swayed everything that happened before. This was completely different in terms of number, in terms of success, in terms of load and capacity. And we as a tech team, back then I was a software engineer, that was kind of my problem too, to make sure that we actually can cope with this suddenly exploding scale that we're dealing with. But that was only Azerbaijan. And this is all to convince you that it was already very, very successful. And we could call it a day. We could say, okay, so far so good. It's good enough. And sometimes indeed, arguably things are good enough, but sometimes they're not. So what Simbrella team didn't do at that point, it wasn't complacent. It wasn't thinking along the lines of, we made it, we can, declare ourselves very successful and stop here, instead of risking and embarrassing ourselves of going to international markets and not being able to deal with it and stuff with that. So instead, all of this actually happened. We went on, we worked in very different environments, in very different cultures, very different companies at scale, I cannot even enumerate all different aspects that were covered in the next 7-8 years. And this has led to those remarkable numbers that you see. If we would stop at Azerbaijan level, it would be what? 8 million? One country? Not so impressive. So don't hesitate. Be bold and dream big. That is good. Strong people are really important. The team is really important. In Simbrella, I would say, I don't know, it's hard to put a percentage as a tag, but let's say 90% of the value of the company came from its people. And those people were just 50 people, right? At the peak of the time when I was there. As far as I know now, it's more, but back then it was 50 and it was already quite cool. So the strength, the ambition, the level, and the desire to grow of those people, and the desire to help each other grow of those people, it made a big difference. Because At this scale, when you're coping with, okay, suddenly I'm going to some new mobile network operator in Nigeria or Southeast Asia where we have like 30, 40 million subscribers. It's 4 times the population of Azerbaijan in a single operator. What can we do? So at this pace, at this scale, it is important that people remain open to grow and that they help each other grow. Because individually, it's very, very hard. It's very hard and unpredictable. These 2 things happened in that company, and I can only assert how important this is. This is Unix philosophy. Do one thing and do it well. Who has heard it? Who knows Unix philosophy? Okay, a few people. Good. What it means is concentrating on a single thing and getting really good at it. It matters. Instead of dispersing yourself and distracting yourself along the lines of many different things that you want to do in parallel, one way, which is an alternative, is just to choose the main thing and commit to it. And that is what Simbrella did. So in its golden age, if I may, I think it was critical that we in Simbrella were committing ourselves to a single line of products. So it wasn't a single product, it was a few, but they were all about mobile nano-financing at scale, helping people keep using their services even if they don't have the opportunity to go and top up their balance to pay for it in prepaid immediately. This was more or less the mission along which we polarized ourselves, and we were working for about a decade to achieve this. And now in the hindsight, I can say that at the moment where there were some cracks on this, at the moment where there were some urges internally, from a good place, of course, but urges to diversify, saying some of the things which make sense, like don't put all your eggs in one basket. At that time, there were some signs of disruption and some signs of distraction that wasn't necessarily a good thing for keeping the momentum and kind of continuing. Although the market has become progressively more and more complicated to work and to operate in. So at that point, of course, maybe it made sense. But doing one thing and doing it well, at least those golden years of Simbrella show me that it's actually a wise thing to do. And that is also what I heard from my mentors in Meta, which I'll come a bit later to. So the last thing from Simbrella is swim with bigger fishes, right? There is this wise saying that if you want to become a better chess player, you should play with a stronger opponent. This is the same idea, just in some corporate/tech world. Again, we feel comfortable as people from our culture in particular, when we deal with a scale that we are familiar with, that we know we will succeed at, that has a very low risk, and some reasonable reward, because high risk normally comes with high reward. High reward comes with high risk, I'm sorry. Swimming with bigger fishes means you're suddenly up against the world of unpredictability, with the world which is bigger than you, your customers, your competitors, your partners. Swimming with bigger fishes means you're upping your game. You are pushing yourself through the boundaries of what you know and what you're comfortable with. And I believe, personally, this is how we grow. For Simbrella, that meant going outside of Azercell first, then outside of Azerbaijan, then outside of CIS, former Soviet Union countries. And we ended up in, 10, 15 countries of Africa. Can you imagine an Azerbaijani company of 50 people who operated on 10, 15 African countries? This is very, very remarkable. And this, again, was coming from leaderships and the core team's mentality of trying to up the game, trying to do more, trying to, achieve more than we know, or achieve at the scale which is greater than we have achieved before, and kind of try to do what feels like impossible, and then do it again. TU Munich and Volkswagen. Show of hands, who knows Technical University of Munich? Good, good. That's much better than Simbrella and Unix philosophy. Very good. Well, I'm in a good academic institution. So who knows Volkswagen? Good, everybody knows Volkswagen. Very good. So this stage is about Germany and about me as I was answering your colleague there, getting saturated with Simbrella, getting hyped, I wouldn't say anything else about AI, and getting into TU Munich, right? So what happened is that I quit my job in end of 2015, right? December, the year ends, and my career at Simbrella, or my kind of time at Simbrella ends. Because I already did my GRE, I did my TOEFL, and what I'm thinking, I have this exceptional GRE score, I have some fantastic, exorbitant TOEFL score, my statement of purpose makes sense, so I'm doing it. I'm getting into top US school. So I applied to top US computer science school, like Stanford, CMU, and so on, a couple of them. And what happened? I got rejected from every one of them. I think I made 5 applications, and the funny thing, I heard the similar story from people who are kind of in this state of mind, right? The funny thing around that time was, my problem was, okay, when I get 5 acceptances, how am I going to choose? That is what I thought, right? When 5 schools admit me, how will I choose? And then what happened? I got 5 rejections. After careful consideration, we regret to inform you that we reject your application. So that is what I got, right? And after a week of sadness and thinking about being a failure, being worried about having a family with 3 kids and kind of what am I doing? I quit my job, now my plan is ruined. I started looking at European schools and I found myself in TU Munich, right? Which you all know, this is great. So what happened is that I first applied to games engineering program and I wasn't admitted, and this is very good because the program happened to be not very good. What I was admitted to is called Informatik in German, or just computer science, right? General computer science. And this is number 14 as of Times Higher Education World University Rankings in Computer Science. This is ranked as number 14 in 2025. I checked 2025, it's 15, but I didn't update because 14 sounds a bit better than 15. I got admitted there. Quickly about TU Munich's master program, it's crazy, especially if you're coming from post-Soviet education as I did, because my bachelor's degree, undergrad, was in Baku State University in applied math, right? When I started my studies in 2000, 2 and 3 zeros. There was no computer science in Azerbaijan. It appeared next year. I studied applied math, and what was very kind of indicative of the type of education that you got back then, I think even now, is that your schedule is fully fixed. You don't decide which courses you take. Here probably you do, but back then, maybe even now, those schools, we didn't. So I get into TU Munich, I'm very happy, I come to Germany, and then I'm told, okay, there are 160 lectures, they all conflict in time. It's up to you. Go figure it out. What do you want to take? There are 18 areas of concentration. Your goal is to pick one and deliver 18 credits from that, 8 credit of others. You need to do a thesis, you need to do a project, you need to do ABC, but mostly it's flexible. You do whatever you want with your informatics program. Other specialized programs like robotics, cognition, and intelligence, which was more AI, but it required German, that's why I didn't get there, they are more fixed. This one was very liberal, and I was very frustrated first because it was immense cognitive load. How do I even do that? I took more courses than I could manage. I tried to study German because TU kindly offered that too. But after a while, again, in the hindsight, I think it was a great thing. So I built my curriculum personally around AI, classical AI outside of machine learning, deep learning specifically, some robotics, and some other cool courses too, social computing, advanced algorithms, and stuff like that. So I studied there, and I was attending a machine learning course by Professor van der Smacht, who in the meantime, while I was studying in TU, he cut his team, cut and paste, right? He cut his PhD student team from TU and has moved it to Volkswagen and has rebranded the team as Volkswagen Machine Learning Research Lab. Because I already knew them and they knew me, they contacted me saying, hey, my previous advisor said, do you want to do a master thesis with us? I said, yes. So I did a thesis with them for about 8 months, actually going there, working full time, being paid half because that's what you get paid when doing a thesis in a German company. And that was my, I would say pretty hardcore, short, but hardcore immersion into the world of research. right? Because my thesis was in variational inference. Tracking and prediction using this multiple object scene recognition with unsupervised learning, using variational inference, and trying to kind of understand the scene and predict how the scene evolved from a sequence of frames of video. So this is a thesis I did. I was pretty happy with the results, as well as my academic advisor, PhD students from the lab. And we tried to publish to NeurIPS, a top conference in machine learning. But then I saw the other side of the academic world in machine learning. At least my experience, I'm not saying it is uniformly like that, although you can do your own research and see. My experience was that it was very concentrated. So the problem we were tackling is worked on by 20 people around the world who all know each other. Some of them are from the same labs, and they hate each other's methods. When you submit, what do you get? A few reviewers saying, no, this is not how you do it, period. The other way is how you do it. And that's it. How do you fix this? You don't, because that's it, right? So I did that, and I realized, okay, I'm still an engineer at heart. I don't want to do research, do this 4 or 5 years, suffering because I cannot get published and stuff like that, right? So what happened is that I stayed as a machine learning research engineer in the lab for another 4 years. And that was an interesting position to be, because everybody in the lab was either doing a PhD or a postdoc having a PhD, or Patrick, the head of the lab, who is the professor and also has a PhD and stuff. So everybody was an academic. But it was, to be fair, the lab, or Patrick, the leadership of the lab, was putting really clearly saying that every piece of research that we do should be tested on real hardware, real cheetah robot, real robotic arm, I don't know, pendulum, something like that, right? But real hardware, not just simulation. But still, everybody was an academic, and I was the only engineer. So I ended up owning the lab's compute infrastructure. This is a very interesting and important problem. Imagine a lab of research scientists, right? They don't know what Docker is, with some exception of people who knew it very well, but 90% of the people don't know how to spawn a Docker container, don't know how to log into, shell and run some commands, don't know how to make a swarm of experiments, stuff like that. All they want to do is write their code, ideally copy-paste it from Jupyter Notebook, upload it into some magic window, press a button, go on a weekend, come back on Monday, see 10,000 experiments run, and a nice statistical analysis of what has succeeded and what not, right? So that they can do it again. This is the essence of machine learning research. You run a lot of experiments on a lot of GPUs. So what I ended up owning back then is a modest cluster of maybe 50, 60 GPUs, but there was a heterogeneous hardware there. There were AMD 64, like Intel x64 architectures, and some Power PCs from IBM. They were some NVIDIA Volta and Ampere, and I think Hoppers were also coming already. So there were this Hopper heterogeneity in terms of GPUs. So there was this many heterogeneous things on the back end of the cluster that needed to be completely insulated and standardized for this crowd of researchers who don't want to think about that. They just want to write their code that would work ideally everywhere, and that would come back to them as a result of running their experiment, right? This again goes back to your question about who asked the question about how did you manage this? You. I said we standardized it, right? So here also, it's kind of a theme of this talk maybe, the standardization. So standardizing across different backends, trying to make it as transparent and as universal as possible to the end user who doesn't really want to dive deep into technical details and is super happy that everything works magically, and having this highly heterogeneous thing running on the background and also servicing the equipment and going and changing the hard disks, upgrading the GPUs and stuff like that. That's one thing that I did with a couple of colleague PhD students back then. And another thing, so after a couple of years of working like that, the lab started kind of losing its initial premise of being this fundamental research organization. So initially, Volkswagen ML Lab was championed, I would say, by some C-level people in Volkswagen, where they would say, you do whatever your fundamental research you want, you publish to top conferences, we just have you and we're happy. But after that, those champions have left, and the leadership started asking questions. Why do we need this? Why do we actually pay for this, right? So the other thing that I got myself into was bridging the gap between this fundamental, bleeding edge, very interesting, high risk, high reward research that the lab was doing, and the needs of the very, I would say, classical German corporation that this lab was part of, because it's Volkswagen, they make cars. And this is German manufacturing company, right? You can imagine the vibe of it. That was the second kind of big area of what I did there. Here we just have 3 takeaways, right? I was thinking really hard about 4th, but I couldn't think about something good. So one thing that I learned, or maybe I knew that, but this experience was, applying to US schools, getting rejected from everywhere, rebounding, applying to European schools, getting into TU and being happy with it and having a happy ever after, right? This tells me, okay, don't give up. You're good. So even if you're having some hard times, even if you're having some backlashes, even if your initial plan didn't work, you're good. Don't give up. All you need to do is just pivot. It's important. So don't do it again, because you will fail again. Pivot. You know what pivot is? Like turn, adapt. And then you adapt, right? Adapt to the new environment. By doing something and failing, you learn something. So your environment, your space of information has changed, because we learned something that we didn't know before. Because the environment has changed, we should adapt to the new environment. We should make a new decision, a new plan, in the light of this new information, right? This is the adapting piece. And then try again. And eventually you'll learn a lot by failing, and eventually you'll get somewhere. The second thesis is from Knuth. Who knows Donald Knuth? Yeah? Okay. Okay, more people know Donald Knuth. Good. Well, the Art of Computer Programming guy. That's 4 thick books about algorithms. Okay, so Donald Knuth was said the best practice, not best practice, as if best practice is something, but the best practice is inspired by theory. For me, this was manifested by actually putting my industrial career on hold for a couple of years, even 2.5 years, and going back to school from 2016 to end of 2018, and just studying and diving into the field of AI and refreshing things that I actually either knew very vaguely or didn't know. Because I never did a computer science degree. My previous experience was in applied math. I got a bunch of theory with some practical context, of course. And this allowed me personally to get some continuous knowledge. And this continuous knowledge was instrumental. It was indispensable in the practice in Volkswagen and practice at Meta, because I knew pretty strongly what the field AI was about. Well, the sad thing is that now it's nothing, well, almost nothing, what it was in 2018, so you should keep adapting, but back then it has put me in a very good position. So the theory matters, right? Especially if the theory is relatable to practice. And the last thing is invest in cultural intelligence. Some of you might have heard about cultural intelligence, right? The classical intelligence, as they're talking about, is IQ, right? This IQ test, intelligence quotient. When you do this, okay, which figure is the next, which number is the next? So it's just about like pure logic and pure kind of thinking, right? Without any background knowledge or feeling or whatever. Recently, in like last 15 years, it was a big topic in my EMBA that I did here. It was emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is about having the right sense of feeling, sense of connection, and understanding of what is happening actually in the emotional context of your work, not just being pure number person and pure IQ and so on. Another thing that is, I think, a bit later is about cultural intelligence. This is extremely important in the current global world, where businesses are often global, the teams are multicultural, multi-language, multi-background. So there is this diversity in many different aspects, much more than there was, for example, 20 years ago, I would say, right? And understanding the cultural context is very, very important. How does it fit into this Volkswagen narrative? Well, my lab that I worked in was about, again, 30, 40 people, pretty young, pretty energetic, really modern, all English speakers, very international. I think we once counted, we spoke around 40 languages in lab, in total, because there were people from China, from Bulgaria, from whatever you want, like from Turkey, from Azerbaijan, and from Germany, obviously. So we were very fluid in terms of finding the same cultural ground, right? And everybody was very happy to commit to it. But when you do this last thing on the previous slide, try to go back to the manufacturing organization in this decades of celebrated tradition of how the things are done in this German Volkswagen as a corporation, then you see a lot of dense culture, right? Because this all, like many of this actually relates to, okay, what German culture is about. This actually helps to understand and to, instead of just keeping, it's kind of going, it's again, one facet of this think global, act local thing, right? When you have some good idea that you want to implement, but then you go and understand the cultural context, that helps you to translate this to the language of people with whom you want to implement it. So I'm not going to ask you who knows Meta. I hope everybody knows Meta. WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram. Llama models, hopefully. So this is from sea to ocean. And quite literally, because most of the time in Meta I was in California, and that was kind of where I lived. It was 30 minutes to the Pacific. I was in Volkswagen, 4th year, got saturated because I realized that in Germany, even if you're in AI lab or something in German company, the career growth is very, very slow and very paced. That was one aspect. And the second was that, things were becoming a bit boring and kind of not so rewarding. So I got a call from a recruiter saying, hey, we're Meta now, beginning of 2022, February. And I said, oh, I hate Facebook. Why should I work for you? And he was like, why don't you give it a try? Very wise. Because I gave it a try, I passed the interviews, and at that stage I was like, okay, of course. I spent so much, I invested so much in preparation and so on, right? I'm not going to say no. And it was a good decision. So in October 2022, I started working in Meta as a machine learning engineer, actually, as an MLE, because that is more or less what I did in Volkswagen, right? Bridging the gap between industry and research. I started there in October. The layoffs happened in November. That was first time in Facebook's 18 years of existence. They did a layoff. They laid off quite many people in Europe. And it was very stressful. The boot camp, which I started in, boot camp is a very interesting concept. You start, but you don't know where you will work. You don't know your team. So you just are in the pool of new hires, right? You are a full-time employee, but you don't know what you'll work on. Absolutely don't know. Like you can end up working on anything fitting your profile. And then it's like a small job market inside the company. Hiring managers, they make posts, like they post their jobs, and you as a boot camper, you say yes, and then you sit with the teams and so on. So I was in that, and in the middle of the boot camp, just before we were about to start engaging with hiring managers and find ourselves a team, it was frozen because there was a layoff. Our bootcamp mentors, we had a mentor, they said, we don't know what's happening. Our mentors don't know what's happening. Directors don't know what's happening. Only some VPs know, but they don't tell anyone. So our bootcamp was frozen completely. And it was very stressful. And we didn't really know what to do. Again, historical fact, right? People who started the same day as me in October 2022, more or less 3 years ago, in Germany. Some of them are still in that frozen bootcamp state, or at least they were in November 2025 when I quit Meta. So more than 3 years after that, right? So if you would just sit and do nothing, you would just stay where you are. And some people did exactly that. What I realized very quickly after I started as an MLE, I did an interview as an MLE. I did machine learning design interview, I passed it. But then I realized I don't want to become an MLE. It's a very interesting field, but it's not my field. My field is infra. I want to do PyTorch. Who knows PyTorch? Good. Quite many people. So I knew PyTorch is Facebook. I knew it's open source. Of course, I used PyTorch before. And I really wanted to be part of this team. So what I did, I started looking proactively for some part of PyTorch team. PyTorch team is big. It's PyTorch.org. It's a few hundred people. So sitting in Germany in my home office, because in Munich there is no office, I started looking at bootcamp tasks that some teams from the US would put and would relate to GPUs, to ML compilers, to like frameworks, to things that I was interested in. I found a team, AI template team, great compiler product, which was then abandoned, and we switched to Inductor, to PyTorch 2. And I started working with them. And I did some bootcamp work with them, meaning I was their trainee for a couple of months. Imagine this, they are in the West Coast, in Menlo Park and in Seattle, right? I'm in Munich, Germany, so 9 hours difference. My 6 p.m. is their 9 a.m. When they come to work, it's already evening for me. That's why I need to sit till at least 10 p.m., but realistically 2 a.m.-ish. So I'm sitting, like, working in the morning. It was excellent working environment, very quiet, nobody's there. You just sit and do your thing. And then the social part of my work starts, right? When people from the US come. So I worked with them for a couple of months like that, and we knew each other and we did some cool projects together. And after that, the tech lead manager of the team, Ying, back then, she reached out and said, hey, Adnan, we already know you very well. We have a position open. Do you want to join us? And I said, yeah, of course. That is what I want to do. So I joined them. I worked there for a year. After a year in the same team, I moved to the US. So I continued working in the same team, but from Menlo Park, California, from the headquarters. And that is kind of the center of Meta, right? When it comes to tech and everything, not just tech. Then I worked there for another 2 years. At my time in the US, most of it, I was a staff engineer, IC6. I don't know what to compare it with. In Google, it's also called IC6. It's kind of the next level after senior engineer. It is the level when direction axis is becoming the most important axis of your performance evaluation. When you are supposed to give direction to others, not just sit and code yourself or hack or whatever. There are experts, there are specialists. You can go this path, but then you should be a really good specialist. Your work should impact multiple teams, not just yours. Mostly IC6 is about giving direction, either technologically or people-wise, writing projects and convincing everyone that this is a good thing to do, not just making them do it. So I was working in PyTorch and AI infra on things like machine learning compilers, GPU kernels, GPU development, high-level, model-level performance, and ads, Rexis, Gen AI, which was becoming a thing in 2023. And the last thing that I'm going to tell in this slide is that Meta was great. It was because I quit, right? For learning, for growth, for networking, for finding good people, for mentoring both ways. I mentored many people, and I was mentored by more than one person. And I learned tremendous amount of stuff from people that I either directly or indirectly was mentored by. But it's not for everyone. It's not the best choice for everyone. I don't want to be exclusive. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not for everyone. What I'm saying is that it's not an ideal choice for every person. Because big tech has its own dynamics, which is crazy. It is crazy paced. It's very quickly changing. It's very impact-driven, very numbers-oriented, like you should do real measurable impact. And sometimes it can get political and other stuff too. So you should know your ways of navigating it. And sometimes the stuff is actually not under our control. So yeah, this is Meta. And final takeaways from Meta, right? And there is one more slide after that, and then we're done. If you take one thing, just one thing from this talk, this is what you should take. This is the most important takeaway from this talk. Please, 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 be open to feedback. To convince you, I've put it uppercase and bold compared to others, right? In Meta, this is a core part of the culture. In Meta, there is this big narrative internally that feedback is a gift. What that means is that if somebody tells you, hey, you're not doing it right, this is how you're supposed to do this, they are not criticizing you. They are not trying to make you feel bad. They are not trying to punish you for something. They are trying to help you. Listen to them. Listen to them and then figure it out, whether that works for you or not. But at least let the signal pass through, right? And then you will decide what to do with it. I cannot emphasize this enough. In our culture, this is even harder than average in my experience and observation. People are resistant to feedback. It's like, okay, whom are you saying what to do? I don't listen. I should figure it out on my own. If that even is not very bad, right? But it's still, I feel it's wrong. So if somebody's trying to help you, get the help and become better. You're winning from it. So be open to feedback. In Meta, feedback is a crucial part of performance evaluation. When my performance is evaluated, it's not just manager. In other companies, in Apple, for example, right? The manager's role in performance evaluation is much bigger. It's just your manager sitting and saying, Adnan did well, or Adnan didn't do well, and then you're getting the rating. In Meta, it's not just that. It's mostly not that, actually. In Meta, you sit and write a self-review. Every half a year, you sit and write what you did during that half a year and how that aligns with standardized expectations of your level and role. For example, software engineer at IC6 level have some expectations on 4 axis. direction, impact, people, and engineering excellence. So you sit and say, for this axis, I did this. For this axis, I did that. But this is not sufficient. You are supposed to get peer feedback of people talking about what you did and how it helped them, how it helped the company, how it helped the project. And then your manager's role is merely to take all that and summarize it into one pager that they can sit and look at with the other managers and do what is called calibration. So the feedback is really, really crucial, at least in that kind of tech environment, right, that I'm talking about. Please be open to it. And if you are not convinced, I'm happy to talk offline about this if you want. Find your passion and go for it. This goes back to Unix philosophy. This resonates with some golden advice that I got from some of my mentors. Ying, for example, the manager of the first team that hired me, she was my mentor for a long time. And that is also what she did. She said, right, you should figure out, Adnan, she said, what you're really passionate about. Don't ask others what to do. Figure out what you want to do and convince them. Because this will help you. If you want to go for something serious, if you want to do anything reasonably serious, right? Any reasonably serious undertaking, there will be backlashes and there will be hard times, inevitably. It cannot be all rosy and simple if this is something valuable and impactful that you're doing, and it's different and it's new. Of course, there will be some backlashes. And your passion about the thing that you do is what is going to help you go through those bad times. So that's why being passionate about it is really important. Don't worry if you don't know. It took me around 40 years to figure out what I'm passionate about. Now I know, but still I'm not quite sure. I came back here to figure out the next thing that I'm passionate about, right? It's okay. Wait for it, be vigilant, and you will figure it out eventually. So it's okay if you don't understand it immediately. Find your passion, go for it, and get good at it. Getting good at it is really important. And being passionate about it will help. Well, networking 3 times. Yes, network. Many people that I got to know in Meta. We are maintaining our connections even today. We are not in Meta anymore. Many of them, like our golden team in Accelerate Enablement, where we did some remarkable things with GPUs and compilation and stuff like that. We increased model performance 5 times sometimes, and that was for free, basically. So the model suddenly needed 5 times less GPUs, and this is enormous amount of money to save for models running on multiple thousands of GPUs, right, in serving. So this team, like I would say 80% of it is not in Meta anymore. Some moved to Anthropic, some moved to OpenAI, Google, NVIDIA, whatever. But we know each other. I know them, they know me, and we will help each other, you know, to find our next opportunity, to advise on some challenges, checking in a couple of times, like a year or a month or whatever, right? This is really good. Having a network and having a support system like that is really, really important. The last thing here is, this is potentially controversial to say, especially in academic institution, but if you want to build a career in modern tech, instead of doing a PhD, consider a tech job. This goes back to your question about should I find a job before I go to master's degree? Yes, I think you should. So in my time in Meta, even in Volkswagen, but especially in Meta, I've seen the things in Meta that just don't exist outside. Companies like Meta, Google, just 6, 7 companies in the world, right? Big tech. They don't. And you can't learn them in any PhD, even Stanford PhD or whatever. I've seen people from Stanford coming, brilliant people, of course, they are Stanford PhDs, what do you expect? But they come and they learn. They come as IC4, mid-level software engineer, and they learn a lot of new things, and they have to learn. If they stick to what they know, they fail. So there is a uniqueness in what you learn there, and in my humble opinion, that correlates with modern tech industry better and faster than what you do doing a PhD when you dive into all possible aspects of one very narrow problem. And if you're very lucky, that very narrow problem can hit the nerve of modern industry. Like if you would do, I don't know, GPU or transformer PhD in 2016, probably that would be a great wave, right? And great impulse to you to go to NVIDIA or whatever and succeed there as a research scientist. But that's very rare because you don't know before you know. And when you know, it's typically very late. So being in a big tech company, especially in a company like Meta where you can change teams every year, that's fine. This is Emin Guleev. Maybe some of you know this, my dear friend. He's in Berlin. This is about working abroad, right? And your study here, I can assume that many of you contemplate the narrative of studying abroad or working abroad or whatever. So this is the thing that I want to conclude with. Once upon a time, when I was still in Germany, I don't know, 2019 or so, we were chatting with Amin, and I told him, hey, you know what? It was kind of sentimental thought from my side. I said we left Azerbaijan to live and work abroad, and this is actually bad because we have deprived Azerbaijan of human capital, right? And what Emin responded was interesting. At least it was kind of eye-opening for me. He said he disagrees because by achieving and excelling abroad, we are promoting our country globally. And this is good, right? So the truth of the situation, I think, is there are things that we can't learn here on the local market, in local education, in local infrastructure. To learn them and possibly to bring them back, we need to do this world voyage and learn those things and expose ourselves to kind of bigger world, bigger tech, bigger science, bigger things, right? And then possibly come back and implement or contribute or do something there, but with that collected knowledge and wisdom. So yeah, this is everything. Thank you very much. I know this was twice as long, but I hope it was useful.